watching Left, Right and Centre. I'm Nidhi Razdan. The big story today has been the escalating diplomatic standoff between India and the United States over the arrest of an Indian diplomat in New York. India takes a tough stand today, but are the retaliatory measures justified? Or does India have a lot to answer for as far as the treatment of domestic help is concerned? Also later in the program, an exclusive interview with Professor Amartya Sen on the verdict on homosexuality, how that has shocked him, why he believes there's no Modi wave, and how the Congress lacks a strategy for the general election. That's a bit later, but first, with National Security Advisor Shiv Shankar Menon calling the treatment given to Devyani Khobragade despicable and barbaric, India today strongly retaliated to her arrest on visa fraud charges. The Indian government has recalled the ID cards of US consulate staff, cards which give them the benefits of diplomatic immunity. They've also demanded to know the salaries of Indian staff working for the US consulates here. And the Indian government clear that it not only wants an apology for the way Ms. Khobragade was treated, she was strip searched, but also for the charges against her to be dropped. The Delhi police removing barricades outside the US embassy, part of retaliatory measures taken by India as details of Devyani Khobragade's arrest became public. She was strip searched, swabbed for DNA and shared a jail cell with drug addicts. A furious Indian government has recalled the ID cards of all staff and families of US consulates in India, cards that give them full diplomatic immunity. India wants to know what salaries are paid to all Indian staff employed in US consulates. Sources say since US consulates are technically US territory, then all Indian staff here should be paid American wages. All airport passes for consulates and embassies have been withdrawn. India has also asked for the visa details of all teachers working at US schools here and what they're being paid along with their bank account details. This is to determine if they're paying tax or not. And all import clearances for the American embassy have been stopped.
For us, completely unacceptable. We have put in motion what we believe would be effective way of addressing this issue, but also in motion such steps that need to be taken to protect her dignity.
The Home Minister Rahul Gandhi and Narendra Modi all cancelled their meetings with the visiting US congressional delegation in protest. Former Foreign Minister Yashwant Sinha went as far as to suggest the invocation of Section 377 on US diplomats in India.
My suggestion to the Government of India is, the media has reported that we had issued visas to a number of US diplomats' companions. Companions means that they are same sex. Now, after the Supreme Court ruling, it is completely illegal in our country, just as paying less wages was illegal in the US. So why doesn't the Government of India go ahead and arrest all of them?
Apart from the way Devyani Khobragade was treated, there is the issue of whether she broke US law by paying her domestic help less than the minimum wage. Indian officials insist this is a grey area and that if indeed the law was broken, why did the US embassy give the domestic help a visa at all, knowing full well that the minimum wage was actually more than Devyani's own salary. They also insist that the help was not exploited. Her medical insurance, food, lodging and travel for home for vacation were all paid for by the Indian government. The question though is, if diplomats can't afford to pay their domestic help US salaries under US law, then why hire them at all? In New Delhi, Nidhi Razdan for NDTV. Well, I spoke earlier to Union Minister and former UN diplomat Shashi Tharoor on this story. Mr. Tharoor, my first question is rather simple. Did Devyani Khobragade break US law?
Well, that I think is for the courts to determine, but very clearly the American authorities appear to believe that she has done so. On the other hand, what she has done is, as a diplomat representing the sovereign country of India, she has taken along with her domestic help to help her in her representational duties. And that requires special consideration on the part of the host government. Believe me, there are at least 100 developing countries with missions and consulates in New York whose diplomats earn less than the US government declares that maids should be paid. So I have absolutely no doubt that if Devyani has done a particular kind of payment arrangement, that it is entirely typical of the vast majority of diplomatic representations in New York. And it seems to me shocking that the US authorities should act in willful disregard of this basic fact.
But when, as you say, Mr. Tharoor, diplomats earn as little as they are, should they be hiring help at all if they can't afford it under US law?
Well, that's exactly the point. You see, the idea is not to hire people from the US labor market. The idea is you're representing a country. You have to have entertainment and other obligations as part of your diplomatic duties. You want somebody who is familiar with your cuisine, with your practices, with your culture, to be able to assist you in so doing. This is standard practice in every country around the world, at least in every country where domestic help is part of the prevailing culture. What we have definitely got to see being done in future cases is to create a diplomatic, a quasi-official status for these domestic personnel or diplomatic representatives, so that they're not treated as if they have been taken from the American domestic labor market. The problem has arisen, I think, because they are acting on the basis of an immigrant in America being paid an unfair wage, whereas here it's a diplomat carrying often a staff member who has worked for her in other countries or at home in India, and who is familiar with the family and is helping in the kind of normal way that we are used to in our country, and that many developing countries is a common practice.
But Mr. Tharoor, the point is that this is US law we're talking about, and if the domestic assistant is then being paid less than the legal limit, isn't that then a violation of the law A? And many would say that it's an exploitation of the domestic help.
But when you consider that the diplomat herself is probably earning less than America considers a maid should be paid, is the diplomat being exploited? We have to have wages that reflect our domestic market conditions. And so very clearly, an Indian diplomat will get an Indian wage plus a cost of living allowance, and we would expect that people in the Indian government's employ performing services like this, whether they're drivers or chauffeurs or office assistants or domestic helpers, would have comparable salaries as they would in this country. We are now being put in a rather peculiar position here, and particularly what's unfortunate is that one individual from one country has been singled out when her situation, I'm 100% sure, is comparable to that of at least 1,000 other diplomats in New York from 100 other countries in a similar way of similar situation.
Mr. Tharoor, we've seen the Indian government taking some very tough steps today. Many say that the Americans have double standards on this, for instance, on how they pay Indian staff here. Some say, for example, the US consulates and the embassy are technically US territory, and therefore the wages of Indian workers there should be equal to American wages.
Well, I wouldn't get into that, but certainly they should be in full compliance with Indian law when they hire Indian citizens. And I think that if the government has now asked them to demonstrate the same degree of compliance that they're expecting from our diplomats with American law, that will mean they'll have to produce PAN cards, they'll have to produce evidence of tax payments, they'll have to show a lot of details of contracts of employment and so on, which we have hitherto not asked them for. I mean, the fact is that if the US can say that consular officials from India are going to be treated in a certain way and they don't enjoy certain protections, then clearly we will have to review how kindly we have been treating consular officials from the United States. I think reciprocity is one of the first principles of diplomatic relations. We value our relationship with the United States. We believe it's important to keep channels open with them. We believe it's a relationship of mutual benefit. But we can't value the relationship with them more than they value their relationship with us. It's got to be give and take. It's got to be reciprocal.